We heard from Benjamin in the morning about how to write a great paper. Now, in the total opposite direction, Leo will going to tell you how not to give a great talk.
Yeah, thanks, Favonia. As Favonia said, I am Leo, and I'm here. I'm an assistant professor at UMD, and I'm here to tell you how not to give a bad research talk. And you can already tell I'm off to a good start because I spent the first half minute repeating exactly what he said. So, off to a good start. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to talk about the research talk. Why we give a research talk, how we give a research talk. Then we're going to talk about how to prepare for a research talk, and then general tips and tricks. I think I can make this a bit more annoying, though. So we're going to start talking about the research talk. First the why, then the how, then we're going to talk about preparing, and then general tips and tricks. So, obviously I'm making a point here, and not just that I'm going to annoy you with tedious animations, but there is this general folklore knowledge that you should tell your audience what you're going to tell them, then tell them again, and then repeat that again or something. And there is some truth to that. The audience needs to know what you're going to say, but more than that, they need to know why they should pay attention to it. In the first half minute or minute of your talk, they're going to decide whether they're going to keep paying attention to you or they're going to turn to their phones. So while some signposting is important, it's more important to tell them why to pay attention. So why should you pay attention? Well, if you're at PLMW, you're probably going to give a research talk at some point in the near or not so near future. So why? Why are you going to give a research talk? Well, time for Family Feud. Probably not many of you know this, but I've asked 100 researchers, like 10, but let's pretend, why give a research talk? What are some good reasons and what are some bad reasons to give a research talk? So let's crowdsource it. What are some good reasons and what are some bad reasons? Who can tell me something? You have a good result. I mean, that's a sort of advertisement for your work. You want to know you want to let other people know that you did something exciting, right? And that really is a very good reason to give a research talk. You want to advertise your work so that other people know about it. Yeah, other ones. Good or bad? Perfect. That's this one. Yeah, that's a very, very bad reason to give a research talk, right? You want people to know who you are, but you don't want to do that by annoying people in your audience. There was another hand. Yes? That's an amazing reason that I don't have here. So now you're the 11th person I've asked, and I'll include you in a future version of this. Fun. Yeah, it's around the same thing. I'll merge them all into a new direction. But yeah, giving a talk is fun. Yes. That actually is here. Advisor told me to give a talk is not a great reason. Conference told me to give a talk so that I can publish is a bit more acceptable, but still not perfect. But yeah, you have to give a talk. Benjamin said this morning that part of giving a research, part of doing research is disseminating your results, and you have to give a talk at some point. Other things. What is the purpose of the talk or anything else? Yes?
You want feedback.
You want feedback. And yes, there are various aspects of this. I will put that as discuss your high-level contributions and discuss what is going on there. You want to tell other people what you did so that they reach for your work when they have a similar situation. And I guess I'll start revealing some things myself. At the same point, you want to convey intuition. You want to convey the high-level idea of what it is you're doing. At the same time, however, you don't want to explain all the details of your work. It's tempting. You wrote a paper, you're very excited about it, but you can't condense an entire paper's worth of material in the 15 or 20 minutes that a research talk is at a conference like this. And the other things that people had said while I was discussing it is you like to hear yourself speak, so sort of what I'm doing right now. And the other one that is really, really cool is this unrelated work, because your audience is definitely not going to be that related work and only them. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Basically, there's one way to sort of group all of those things together. One of the things you want to do in your research talk is explain what you did. And that comes in very stark contrast with everything on the right, which is you can't explain too much of what you did, right? And that's a very real tension. And there are basically a couple of weapons you can use in your arsenal in resolving this tension in a research talk. And the primary one that actually Benjamin said in the beginning as well in the morning is use examples. So practicing what I preach, here's an example. Now, what I'm doing in general in my research is property-based testing, so that's where I'm going to base my example on. And let's pretend I'm giving a talk at an audience like this. Well, property-based testing and random generation. What is property-based testing? Well, programmers write properties of software systems or components as functions from sample inputs to Booleans. A tool generates many random inputs and applies a function to each one. This is popularized by Haskell's quick check by John and Kuhn. And the problem that usually is associated with it is that properties with preconditions make generation hard. And if I squinted a bit and took all of those sentences, wrapped them in a paragraph, it would make for a decent but probably not good paragraph in a paper. For a talk, yeah, how many people are excited about whatever follows this? Probably nobody understands what it is unless you're actually working in this area. So how could you make this better with an example? Let's look at each point one by one. What is the purpose of the first bullet? Properties. What are they? Well, here is a property. What is this? This is a specification that says that for all expressions, if you evaluate the expression and you evaluate a version of that expression that has been optimized, they should yield the same thing. Now, in a PL audience, that should be something that's relatively intuitive. If you optimize something, you don't want to change its semantics. And the question that I'm going to ask to lead my hypothetical talk is, how do you test this property? Okay, I've framed a narrative. I have an example. I've asked you a question. And now I've gotten you thinking, how do you do this? What is my solution? Property-based testing. A tool generates many random inputs and applies the function to each one. Now, having a concrete example from the previous slide, this already should make more sense than before. But rather than telling you that, I can show you that. What do I mean? Well, let's start with a black box. Let's start with an expression generator. And that generator produces various lambda terms, like the identity function. You run the function, and then you get back a result, true or false. If it's true, you try again, and again, and again, and again, until hopefully, at some point, you find an expression, or maybe not hopefully, depending on which side you're on, you find some expression for which the property returns false. And then you return it to the user. And that's it. That's really property-based testing in a nutshell. And rather than just having a sentence there, you now have a visual idea of what is going on. Okay, let's move on. Next bullet point, related work. If this was the first half a minute of my talk, would you care about related work? Probably not. So what are we going to do? Not do that. So the interesting point, the point of the talk is to tell other people what you did. So what's the problem? Properties with preconditions. Does this give you an intuition why that's a hard problem? Probably not. So let's find that intuition. So what was I doing here? I was talking about generating expressions. In the general case, you don't have a concrete property. You have probably something of this form, a universally quantified property of the form for all x of some type t, p of x holds. What did I describe? You generate x based on type information, and then you test whether p of x holds. And that can generally work, but there is a class of very real class of properties that have preconditions. How does what I said apply here? Well, you generate x based on type information. You check whether p holds. If it does, you test the interesting part. Otherwise, you start over. But if p is very, very sparse and is satisfied by relatively few inputs, well, you're not going to have a very efficient time doing this. For example, the previous property that I had with testing and testing optimizations, well, what if instead of just having expressions, you wanted to make sure that if a C program doesn't exhibit undefined behavior, then it behaves the same before and after optimizations. Now it becomes a test of time PLDI paper from 12 years ago. So yeah, this can be much harder than before. Okay, taking a step back, what is the main difference between these two, right? The main difference is that in the second part, where I was using an example, I tried to convey more intuition about it. I tried to give you more of an idea of what's going on and what the problem I'm solving is. And hopefully, you've now made an association that, oh, if I ever want to test something that has a very restrictive precondition, I'm going to go and read one of the abstracts of this paper rather than the entire thing, because nobody does that. So on the other hand, there is a trade-off. The trade-off is that there is less time to spend on technical details. But that's actually a feature, because the point of the talk is not going through all the technical details, is advertising your work. So both things are better. Just use examples, and everything will be better off. Taking a step back, the first weapon in your arsenal for resolving this tension is examples. But there is an even better weapon that people don't tell you about, and that is you lie. And when I say you lie, I don't mean you say you did X, but you actually did Y. What I mean you lie is you simplify things. You make things simpler by omitting some information. And in fact, I've already lied to you multiple times already in those 5 minutes that I've been talking. Why? Well, let's take a step back. Like, what is the language that I'm using there? It's probably Galena in Coq, maybe, but not really. I didn't say that. Why didn't I say that? Well, first of all, it's something that would be familiar, but it's probably would have put a few people off if they don't know it. But at the same time, if I said it was Coq, then what is that spec thing over there? That's not a keyword. Usually it's like theorem or lemma. But if I put a theorem then and ask how do you test this property? Well, someone will go ahead and ask, why should we test something that we proved? And that's a very valid question, right? Like, it's something that I should be able to answer, but it's not something I want you thinking about in the first 30 seconds. And even worse, if I said this was Coq, what the hell is that propositional equality doing there? I said that you're running this property, right? Like, I said that you're running this thing. This is not something you can get a Boolean out of. And I would have to use equal question mark or something, or a question mark at the end to make things work. And that's a lot of details that I would have to explain, where by just lying and pretending this is some pseudocode that looks very much like Coq but isn't, yeah, nobody had a problem with this. So lie. Okay, so two weapons, examples and lies. How do you use them? How do you use them to prepare for an actual research talk? So let's put everything in perspective and create a timeline from now until at some point, hopefully, you're going to give a talk. And the other most important point in this timeline is you're at POPL. Well, fine, maybe writing the paper is important as well. So this is the timeline. When does preparing for a talk start? The answer I want to give you and I want to convey is it starts now. It starts literally right now from this conference. Why? Well, in this conference, you are going to go to other people's talks. I know the general consensus is don't go to too many talks. And trust me, you're not at risk of not going to them if you're a first-person student. Like, you're going to go to enough of them. What I want to convey is that when you do go to other people's talks, don't just look at the content. Look at what makes the talk tick. Look at the people next to you while their talk is being given, and pay attention to when are they going to start looking at their phones? When are they going to start taking their phones out and start paying attention again? What did the speaker do to make them do that? What did the speaker do to lose them or gain their attention again? All of these things are very important, and you have to start observing them. Now, if there's nothing else you get out of this talk, just remember this. When you go to a talk, analyze what the speaker is doing. And I remember back when I was at Penn, I think it was Steve that sent an email to everybody in PL Club that was, you should go to faculty job talks at your university because, one, it makes the school look good to the applicants. Two, it makes the PL group look good to the university. Three, it makes you learn about other research areas. And four, at some point, you're going to give a research talk. Like, yeah, the first three reasons are good reasons. I didn't care as much about them. But I did want to give a job talk at some point. And similarly, you are going to want to give a research talk at some point. So understand what makes a research talk good and what isn't by going to as many of them and recognizing what's going on. OK, so you go to other people's talks. But in the meantime, until you have a research talk of your own at POPL or whatever, take your time and try to give as many talks as possible. Any chance you get. Reading group presentations at your university. Final projects in your classes. Regional seminars, they're starting to get revived. NJPLS, the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, anything like that. Just sign up to give as many talks as possible. That's the only way to get rid of talk jitters and anything like that. Then at some point, you're going to write a paper. I'm not going to touch the writing aspect of this. Benjamin gave a talk this morning. They're amazing PLMW talks. Derek Dreyer gives one. Simon Peyton-Jones gives one. The latter two also give amazing how to give a talks at PLMWs, probably better than mine. Go look at them. But at some point, you've written a paper. You've written the paper, it's published, it's accepted, and now you're called upon to give a talk. What's next? Well, you have to figure out the story of the talk. What is that? Well, it's tempting. You have a paper, it was accepted, just reuse the same thing, right? Well, sort of. The story of the paper and the point of the paper is to convey all of your technical details. The point of the talk is to not do that. The point of the talk is to advertise what you did. It's to convey motivation, the problem, and maybe high-level intuition about your solution. That's sort of like the introduction of your paper. So basing your story of your talk around your introduction or something like that as a starting point is a good idea, but it should be tailored to what your goals are, which is motivation and high-level idea. And furthermore, what should be further tailored is for your audience. Like, I'm not going to talk about this extensively because Benjamin spent the entire talk talking about the curse of knowledge, but the audience that you're giving the talk at is you right now. If you follow my advice and go to POPL Talks and look at the audience, more than half, the vast majority, are going to be graduate students. If you're giving a talk at POPL or any other conference like this, there will be a few experts in the room. Some people will know exactly what you did. Some people are going to be giving the talk after you, and that's the reason they're there. And most of the people are going to be grad students that are just generally interested in the area. So when you're crafting your talk, don't craft your talk for your expert reviewer, craft your talk for whoever is next to you right now. Unless the person next to you right now is Derek Dreyer, because yeah, someone has that there. Yeah. Okay, so you crafted your talk, you made your talk, you tailored it to your audience, and now you're starting to preparing slides. And I know this is going to annoy a few people, but please, for the love of God, use presentation software. And you might have noticed that every time I've used Beamer, it's been a bad slide to make a point. And I'm not saying good Beamer talks are not possible. I've definitely seen amazing research talks that are based on Beamer. Like Anto back there has given one of the best talks I've seen with Beamer. But first of all, he writes 6 figures faster than I can draw them by hand. He has since to switch to Keynote or something. And yeah, like I cannot do that, and it takes a lot of effort. Secondly, Beamer makes it far too easy to fall into bad habits. I can just go to my paper, copy all of my inference rules, put them in one slide, and then start explaining them. Yeah, like that. Nobody's going to do that for POPL, but maybe I'll cut some corners here and there and make it easier on myself. But there's something even worse about Beamer, which is not something that you do. Like even if you're the best presenter ever and you're going to not fall into any bad habits, if you start paying attention to the audience at various talks, you're going to notice that the moment the Beamer talk arrives, the audience sort of groans. There's like, not another Beamer talk, not another thing. Like we are predisposed that something is going to go wrong. And you can overcome it. Like you can make your audience be pleasantly surprised by what follows, but why start at a disadvantage? Just don't put your audience in this negative frame of mind that they're going to look at their phone before you even start talking. Because they're going to do that. We have phones now. Okay, so we've created the story, we've tailored it to our audience, we've created our slides. What's next? Well, what's next is you actually have to speak. And you have to deliver the talk in words. One approach I've seen is script the entire thing. It's not a bad idea to know exactly what you're going to say, but you should have some flexibility in things going wrong. You might forget something, someone might ask a question. So you need to be able to navigate through different things. On the other hand, one piece of advice I received very early, which was really good, is script the intro. Your first 30 seconds are when you're going to have most of your stress, And if you know exactly what you're going to say in those 30 seconds, then you're going to go in the flow, and then it's going to take you wherever it takes you. Similarly, script your transitions. Knowing how you go from slide to slide is very easy to get wrong and very easy to get into bad habits. I still remember one of my first talks, Benjamin came to me after, like, you fixed all the high-level points, but at every single transition, you used the word so. And in retrospect, I did that, and then I have made a conscious effort not to do that. So, you have your entire talk ready, you've done the entire thing, and now you're going to practice. And when I say practice, I mean really, really practice. Any opportunity you get, to anyone that we're here, to yourself, to your mirror, to your wall, to your friends, to your colleagues, and listen to the feedback. If anybody tells you that they didn't understand something, or that something looks too verbose, or that something is too vague, or anything like that, it's not a critique at you. I mean, it is, but it's not a critique at your skills, it's a critique at your talk. Just listen to that advice and try to figure out where it comes from. I wouldn't recommend that for a first talk, but in general, try to see a recording of your talk. It's a very, very humbling experience, and I will leave it at that. The last reason to practice a lot is to get the timing right. When you are giving a talk like this, you have a predetermined slot, right? It's 20 minutes, 15, 10. You don't want to be in the middle of your talk and start and be like, damn, I'm running out of time. I'm already at 25 out of 30 minutes, so I can't do this. No. This would be really interesting, but no. This is fun. Yeah, we don't need this. Oh, yeah, okay, we're back on track. So you go at the end, and you're actually delivering your talk. What can you do? Well, the first thing, as I just said, is pacing. When you're actually delivering your talk, you're going to be stressed. You're going to be excited. And that has a different effect to different people. When I get stressed or excited, I give the talk faster. And like when I timed this morning, I was here at this exact point at like the 25-minute mark, and now I'm at 23. Like I'm already speaking faster. Other people speak slower. You need to make a plan for that and adjust. How do you do that? Well, in my very first talk, I had a friend in the back of the room going like this every time I went faster. And George spent the entire talk being like this. It was insane. At the same time, you have to adjust for the other variables when you're giving a talk. If you do pay attention at what's going on in other talks, then you're going to identify sort of two general types of speakers. There is the very enthusiastic, very funny, very gung-ho speaker that takes you by the hand and you have no option but to pay attention to what they're saying. Like if you're ever in a talk by Michael Greenberg, you'll understand what I mean. And there are amazing examples, and that can work amazingly well. On the other hand, there are people that are just very calm, very collected, and like in a serene tone of voice, leave you no option than to pay attention. Like Ben Greenman, if you're ever in one of his talks, I have no idea how he does it. Just look at examples like this online. It's crazy what you can do in either style. But the important thing is find your style. Like you're enthusiastic, you're calm, you have a lot of things to say, you say them, or you say things with a few words. Find what works for you, find people that follow that style, and try to imitate it. And finally, try to keep the audience engaged a bit. Benjamin this morning had this whole shtick of making you talk to each other. It then had to tune that back a bit, but yeah. I did the whole Family Feud to engage some questions. You'll notice similar patterns throughout the whole week. And even more importantly, find the nodder. There's always a nodder, and probably more in the audience, so thank you and you. Because this is really, really useful for a speaker to just know that someone at least is following. And finally, just to make sure that we're back on track, like I said a lot of things. I said do X, do Y, do Z, or whatever. Those are rules. They're devised from my observations of things, but they're personal recommendations. Figure out what works by observing other people, and feel free to break things. Like if one of my students came to me putting an entire paragraph on a slide and then reading it out loud, I would just tell them to scrap it. When Benjamin did it this morning, I was wondering for 5 minutes, how the hell did that work? Like, it worked then. I have no idea why. I haven't seen it work since. But yeah, if you know the rules, you can break them. But learn them before you do. And with that, thank you, and I'll take your questions. No, what are you doing? This is a Beamer slide. I'm obviously doing something wrong. What am I doing wrong? This is the last slide, right? This is the last slide. This is the one slide that's going to stay on there for like the entirety of the Q&A. What should you put there? Whatever you want your audience to remember. So what did I want you to remember? Go to other people's talks, and when you do that, look at what they do, look at what works, look at what doesn't. And with that, actually thank you, and I'll take the questions.
All right, so we are going to take questions. I see one there.
Cool. Thanks for the talk. It was awesome. So I think I really like slides that are less verbose. They have more images, etc. They work really well for PLMW type talks, but for research heavy talks with a lot of formalism or a lot of math, it's really challenging to distill your message. You still want to convince people that you did real work, real proofs. You can't just like get by on vibes.
Yep.
So like what are your tips then for balancing that level of formalism, displaying math without losing people with like, 9 equations or a bunch of inference rules or whatever?
So great question. And I would say 2 things. The first one, examples. Keep an example, work your entire formalism around that thing, and that's generally a good idea. Like, you're not going to cover everything, but you shouldn't cover everything. You can be like, these are the rules, this is how I give semantics to this example, or how I type check this example or anything, and then go read the paper for the rest. Second, go see John Hughes' talks. I've seen him give 20-minute talks with like a number on the slide for the entire thing. It's insane. Just look at other people's talks on how they do it to get ideas, and secondly, use examples as much as possible.
Okay, so one minute.
When you say don't use Beamer and use a presentation software, what do you use to typeset your figures in your math such that they don't look terrible in presentation software?
You can type LaTeX in PowerPoint, right?
Wait, you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there are two parts to answer that question. First of all, if there's really a need to put math, you can just put it as a figure from tech. I definitely don't recommend that. Every time you're thinking of doing math in a talk, you should be making damn sure that you need that piece of math there. That said, it's possible to, like, whenever you open equations in PowerPoint, you can just type tech commands, and that forms an expression, and you can definitely do that. Like, it's restricted, but that's probably a feature. You shouldn't be having the arbitrary power of tech in PowerPoint. Bad habits.
Okay, anyone having, oh.
I've heard 2 philosophies for slides. One is that the slides should be like completely independent and someone should be able to go through them after your talk and learn what you said without listening to you. And the other philosophy is that, they're an accompaniment and the full talk is using both streams of information in parallel. So which one do you recommend, or are they compatible some way?
I'm still figuring that out, if I'm being honest, right? Like early on, when I was giving talks, I was more prone to put more stuff on the slide because I wasn't sure people would follow what I was going to say, and it's good to make sure that you can hook them back in at arbitrary points. The more comfortable you get with what you're doing and how to explain things, the more you can leave off the slides and make sure that you can re-engage your audience later on. I don't have a good answer to that question. I do think that you can create versions of your slides that are more self-contained so that you put on your website, and then versions of your slide that you can use for the actual talk, and then version of your slides that you can use for even different talk. Like, I would give a different talk at PLMW, a different talk at POPL', a different talk at my undergrad's PL seminar, right? So having the very, very pedantic version that you said in the beginning where all the information is there, and being able to cut down from it is definitely easier than the other way around. On the other hand, it's very tempting to just not cut down and just have the entire thing, which then the audience will just be looking at your slides instead of you and not paying attention. Balancing that is hard, and the only way you can get better at it is with practice.
I've seen a lot of presentations that are black and white. So my question is like using colors in presentations.
I'm probably not a good person to talk about this because this entire theme is blatantly stolen from one of Benjamin's old talks. My color appreciation is not the best if you judge of my very early talks. So figuring out a correct color palette that is colorblind friendly and everything is hard, but it definitely works out if you find one, right? It's better to show colors to people and not have everything be completely black and white. That said, I've seen black and white talks that work amazingly well, so it's up to you and your particular aesthetic, I think.
I guess like re-engaging with your audience, what are your like thoughts on, I mean, people do different kinds of things like asking questions mid-talk versus saving them for the end versus having like a completely self-contained.
I think that allowing out questions in the middle of the talk, especially if they're a clarification, is definitely important. Like, no matter how much you practice and how many people you give a talk to, especially a research talk like this, it's different giving it to the 10 people in your research group and different giving it to the 200 or 100 people that will be in the POPL audience. And people will come up with things that you haven't thought of, will have a different viewpoint, so stopping at that point and clarifying things is definitely interesting. That said, if there's a huge tangent and more of an opinion than a question, that should probably go to the end.
Questions? Sure. You said that the purpose of the talk should be to convey like motivations and high-level intuitions. But for things like CAV, POPL, so for these conferences, should you divide the content of the talk so that both general audience of PL as well as experts could get something out of it? And how would you like consider dividing the time?
I mean, depending on, great question. So depending on what you want to accomplish, you should do a different thing. If your goal is to tell a lot of people that you've done this cool new thing, and if they ever are in a similar situation, then they should reach for your work and go read your paper, then most of your time should be spent for the majority of the audience. If your goal is to come to the conference and convince that the one expert reviewer that this is really cool and you should work together, maybe you should do something different, but that's not most people. Most talks should be accessible to a general audience, and they should just be motivation and a tiny bit of the high-level solution that you're trying to solve. Some technical bits that might be appreciated by very few people, also fun to include if you have time. With the move towards smaller and smaller talks, you probably don't have time for that. Like when I started, POPL talks were like 30 minutes, 25 plus 5, then it became 20 plus 5, now it's like 18 or 16 plus 5. Yeah, you don't have time to get into very gory details, unless there's something particularly interesting that not 2 people in the room, but like 20 would follow. Then, yeah, maybe that trade-off is worth it. But again, it should be a conscious decision whether you do that or not just the default recipe that you follow.
Okay, question? Oh, got one.
Hi, do you have any recommendations related to body language?
It greatly depends on the venue, honestly. Like here, I don't have a lot of space to move around. On the other hand, there was ICFP in St. Louis, where then it was an entire theater stage, and like the second speaker had to follow Simon Peyton-Jones give a keynote who's like bouncing around back and forth. You have to balance it, right? Like here, I could not do anything other than move around and like nod a bit or anything like that. I don't have it, like I haven't paid too much attention in that aspect of things other than see what other people do before you and try to do whatever works. But definitely, like if this is your stage, there's not much body language you can be using.
Questions?
It was a good talk. Thanks. I want to ask, like, if the topic is intuitive, then it's easier to convey. But what if I'm facing a like non-intuitive topic, or some topic with a lot of dependencies, where I need to get a lot of introductions to a lot of things, and then jump to my topic?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? Like, what do you do if your topic has a lot of background material to cover? What do you do if it's very math heavy or math specific? And I guess my answer to that is still use examples. I've written papers that have been quite math heavy. You can just lie and simplify them to the point where someone can understand the idea of what you did. And maybe the experts in the room at the very end, you can tell them like, okay, here's the Grizzly math, here's what typing rule we introduced to make everything go away and like work. But if the majority of your audience is you right now, as you're going to notice in the next couple of days, what's the point of giving a talk to this audience if 90% of them don't follow a single word of what you say after the introduction, right? Teaching them something, good. Teaching them one notion, like, okay, I talked to you about property-based testing. You didn't know what property-based testing was before. You have an idea of what it is now, I can talk about it. But talking about property-based testing and fuzzing and blah, and adding typing rules and adding some linear logic on top or whatever else you want to do, probably not going to fit in a single talk. So balancing what you're going to do is basically figuring out the one example you want the audience to get. Build up to one concrete thing that you want to explain, like this is what we solved, and just explain all the background needed for that particular thing. And for the rest, there's the paper.
Two more questions. And also, Leo, I believe you can move a lot. But anyways, no more questions? Okay. No more because you have X ones already, right? So let's have others first.
So I guess sometimes in a talk, there's a definition you've introduced before in the talk that becomes necessary later on. And so you might feel it's useful to reprint it, but at the same time that clogs up some space on slides, makes them harder to use. I guess, do you have a recommendation about navigating this situation or avoiding it in the first place?
So if you have a definition that you put very early on that you're going to use in slide 40, put it in slide 39, right? Like when you're reading a paper, where your audience is reading a paper, they can go back and reread that definition. When your audience is listening to your talk, they're not able to rewind your live talk to go back and reread your definition. So you define it exactly where you're going to use it, or maybe if you've used it like if you define and use it 5 times, you can use it again in the future. But otherwise, just keep things as close as possible. Otherwise, you're going to lose people.
Okay, last one. Are you sure? Sure.
The slides for my next talk have already been typeset in Beamer. What can I do?
As you can tell, I converted a lot of them into a PowerPoint. I mean, I don't know. If your talk is already done, fine, and you don't have time. The main thing I would say is make sure you didn't cut corners, right? Like, make sure that you didn't you thought about what you're putting on the slide rather than this was in my paper, so I'll put it here and I'm going to explain it afterwards. Like in a talk, you should be adding stuff, not copying stuff and figuring out what to delete. So if everything that is in your talk has a reason, yes, you're going to have to overcome the, oh God, a Beamer talk again, but that's doable. What you can't overcome is, oh God, an entire slide of this or whatever I have here. Yeah.
Okay, so let's thank Leo again for this amazing, not